Hello everybody, you have tuned in to Eric Jose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I cover virtually any aspect of making a murderer. I go over the evidence, the documents, the photos. So if you like, stay tuned, and in the future I'll have many more videos besides the one you're about to see. Okay, so just to recap from the last video, part 1. This is the sign that was found in Stephen's desk. When the desk was first found, you could not see any markings near any of the edges of this piece of paper. But after this Auto Trader magazine that you see there moved, which had a felt marker sitting right on top of it, okay? Once that moved, suddenly this appeared as if they pulled it out and it was on the end and that it had these markings on it, but it can't because part of the end was sticking out and there was no markings on the paper if you watch the first video. This is a document about Mr. Metz, who I talked about in the first video. On 11/15/05, investigations received a note from Captain Rush indicating that he had received an overnight voicemail from Paul Metz. The note indicates that on that night of 11/1/05, he heard a big whoosh and thought it was a power company problem. On 11/18/05, I, Dettering, did leave a voicemail for Mr. Metz's machine and advised him to contact me on my cell phone. On 11/18 at 15:43 hours, I did receive a phone call from the following subject regarding this matter. Paul J. Metz. Metz indicated he has property of approximately 4 1/2 miles due north of Avery's auto salvage yard. He indicated that on 11/1/05 at approximately 17:30 hours, he had been feeding cattle on his property. He stated he heard a loud whoosh and indicated it reminded him of incidents where he had poured gasoline or other highly volatile substances onto a fire. Metz stated that approximately 10 minutes later he smelled something that was similar to wires burning. However, he indicated the smell was not that, but he was unable to describe it, but stated it was very vile smell. He stated the cows had gotten very spooked and he could not get the cows back under control and they had damaged fences. Metz stated he had been in contact with WPS that evening, which is the power company, and there were no problems with the power outages. He stated the wind was blowing out of the south or southwest, which I disagree with and which the weather in the area disagrees with at the time. He indicated his property is located at the intersection of Yambo Creek and Zander Road. He advised me he's usually at the property should I choose to speak with him further. Investigation continues. Okay, so now we move into the actual interview of Mr. Metz, where they actually go and meet with him. So on Sunday 11/20/05 at 14:51 hours, I, Dettering, did meet with Paul Metz, previously mentioned in this report, and at his property just west of the intersection of Yambo Creek Road and Zander Road. I had spoken with Metz by telephone about the whoosh from the area of the Avery property. He states that as the crow flies, his property is approximately 4 1/2 miles from the Averys, and he heard a whoosh. I asked him how he is certain that he heard the whoosh on 11/1/05. He stated he was positive it was 11/1/05 as it was the day after Halloween. Metz indicated between 1700 and 1800 hours, all of his cattle were lined up along a fence line at the southern edge of his property near the road. He stated the air was really heavy that day and that there was a breeze out of the south. He stated he heard a whoosh off in the distance and after a few minutes smelled an odor similar to burning wires. He stated he is self-employed as a commercial electrician and is familiar with burning wires. He stated while the odor was similar to burning wires, it was something different than burning wires. He stated he began to detect the odor of very faintly approximately 5 minutes after the whoosh. He stated his cattle were bothered by the smell to the point of knocking down fences in order to try and get away. He stated he did not see any actual smoke due to the fact that it was dark or almost dark. Metz stated he got in his four-wheeler in an attempt to get his cattle back under control. He stated he got close to Zander Road, traveling east from his property, and the smell got stronger. Metz stated he subsequently had a relative contact with Kewanee Nuclear Plant, but learned they were not online at all that day. He stated WPS was also called within 1 hour of the odor being detected. However, they reported no outage in the area. He stated WPS was actually contacted by his uncle. Anyways, at 2:55 p.m., Paul Metz did provide me with the following written statement. Okay, so skipping a little bit here to the top of this page, I smelled something like wires burning. At this point, all of the cattle ran to the northeast of the property, going through the fences and knocking down the fences at the northeast edge of the property. I just want to point that out. I think it's important, especially when I get to talking about wind direction that day and stuff here. What the Weather Service says that contradicts with what he says, along with the statement about the cattle anyways. So, and along with wind speed too. So this statement is signed by Paul J. Metz. He cleared, Dettering cleared the Metz property to 1511 hours. He then, instead of heading east on Zander Road, which is where he said the smell was getting stronger. Metz said the smell was getting stronger when he was on his golf cart or whatever. He doesn't. He goes 0.2 miles east on Zander and then makes a right onto Yambo Creek Road and goes south to straight to the Avery property. The Avery property was 4.5 miles away from that property, and it's even further away from 3302 Zander Road. So strange. Okay, so this here is kind of to show you guys the area. This is the mark where Paul Metz lives. That gray pin right there that you see. That's Paul Metz's house, or where Dettering went to visit him. That's Avery Salvage down there. Okay, there's a 4.5 mile distance between those two. Okay, as the crow flies. So the winds were actually not very high on either Halloween or on November 1st. The wind speed was like under 10 miles an hour. Okay, so let's say it's at 5 miles an hour. Well, then it would have taken an hour for that smell to get to Paul Metz's property there from the Avery Salvage, if the wind was blowing from the southwest, from the southwest to the northeast. Sorry. So if that's in fact what was happening, which I am not convinced it was, because the Weather Service claims that the wind was coming from the west, northwest, and blowing into the southeast, which makes more sense with the way that his cows panicked. So, and the reason why I say that is because here we'll show you a different map. Okay, so with this map, I'm going to actually kind of depict the direction of the wind. Now, if you imagine it coming from the top left-hand corner there and blowing maybe kind of towards the bottom right-hand corner there, you would imagine the wind is going to be blowing this whatever smoke or smell and whatever kind of at a downward direction. So that means that the smoke and smell are going to be being pushed southward and in eastward, but southward as well as eastward. So that would explain to me why the cows would run to the northeast edge of the property, because the wind was blowing at a southwesterly direction. That was probably the clearest point. And so now let's say what Mr. Metz says is correct. Let's assume that the wind is blowing from a southwest to a northeast direction. Well, let me tell you something. That really doesn't make sense. Because he said himself in his statement to police that the cows ran to the northeastern edge of the property and were breaking fences at the northeastern edge of the property. Okay? If that was the place where the smell was the least, or was the least offensive, then it doesn't make sense, because the wind would have blown right through that corner of his property. It would have made more sense that the cows went to the northwestern edge of the property if the wind was blowing the direction that he suggests. So that's just one thing that makes me wonder about Mr. Metz here. I don't know what exactly he was hoping to accomplish with this statement, but it's definitely off. It doesn't make quite a whole lot of sense. Also, add to that the fact that the smell would have taken a lot longer to get there than what he's saying. 5 to 10 minutes? No way. No way. With the wind speed that day, that fire and that whoosh that he heard had to have been within like a half a mile. So, okay, so here we see an image of Paul Metz's property at 2530 West Zander Road. Okay, you see what this is saying here. It's talking about what the weather report is for that day and what was really happening there, according to the Weather Service. That there was a wind speed of 8 miles an hour. Okay, 8 miles an hour. Okay, that means it would have taken at least 50 minutes or so for the smell to travel from Avery Salvage to this property, about 4.5 miles. I mean, it would have taken a lot longer than 5 or 10 minutes. And and seriously, dude, there's no way he's hearing the whoosh from 4.5 miles away. I mean, it's kind of absurd that he made this claim, and I think maybe that's why Kratz didn't even want to touch this evidence. But that's speculation. But I mean, it is kind of ridiculous claim that he's making. So, I mean, I just seriously doubt you could hear a whoosh like that from 4.5 miles away. So, anyways, so we also see that the wind was blowing from a west in a northern direction to the southeast. So, how the smoke or smell could have possibly traveled from Avery Salvage is okay. So that brings us back now to trying to figure out what's going on here. So here's the thing: we know that sign that we saw in Stephen's desk did not have writing on it at first, and it did have writing on it later after the auto trader with the black felt marker had been moved in front of the printer. That sign suddenly had writing on the back of it. So I believe that investigators were trying to push the evidence to point to this 3302, or they were planting evidence there, or that's somewhere where the dirty cops were setting it up, and so everything was going to point there. But what I think happened is that when they realized that Stephen was leaving on the night of the 4th or whatever, going to Crivitz and was going to be gone, they suddenly thought, oh wait, instead of planting here and having it point to this location, why don't we just move the stuff right onto his property, and we'll just get the bones and move them over there or whatever. So but I think this is what they were setting up originally, was here, because that sign is extremely odd, the way that lettering appeared on there, because it clearly wasn't on it at first. And like I said, it's so conspicuously fishy that writing appears after the auto trader with the black felt marker got moved. So I think this was a potential setup site here at 3302 after they had already found the actual site that Mr. Metz was talking about. Because although I believe Mr. Metz's cows reacted to this smell and stuff, and although I believe he heard a whoosh and I believe he smelled something foul, I don't believe it came from the direction that he's claiming it came from, because it contradicts the weather service. It contradicts logic, judging by the area that his cows ran to. So, that's what I believe and what I don't believe from Mr. Metz. So that brings us back to the question: why Zander Road? Okay, I think it could have just been an arbitrary decision based on a piece of property that was unoccupied, and therefore there was nobody around, because this property was unoccupied. That 3302 Zander Road, it had no residents. It was actually up to be sold, and there was nobody living there. So that makes it prime, because their comings and goings aren't going to be as seen as by nearly as many people, and so that makes it kind of a unique spot. So I think that's where they were kind of planning their initial planting party. But I truly believe that Stephen choosing to leave for Crivitz for a weekend or whatever, for a couple days or whatever, made them feel bolder, and they decided to move it right to his front doorstep. Hence the whole "we've had a change of plans" thing. So think what you like, but it is strange. Alright, so here we see a record of when 3302 Zander was sold. Also down there we see an actual Google Earth depiction of 3302 Zander Road. That's where the pointer's pointing at right now. That's the actual residence at 3302 Zander Road. You can see it's all pretty much wide open around it and all that stuff. It's, fairly far away except from that. But it's still a pretty great distance between them, and the house there is surrounded by trees that obviously didn't just get put there probably in the last couple years, so they were probably there already as well. So it was like a secluded house where nobody was there, so less people to ask questions. So then that brings us to this guy here. This is the record that it was sold on March 31st of 2006. Brendan's confession, they got everything they needed. Brendan's confession, which they felt helped them seal the deal with the whole case with Teresa Hallback, the death of Teresa Hallback, and Avery as the culprit. They felt like they had it all wrapped up. So, hey, by March 31st, they didn't need this property anymore. So whoever could just go sell it or whatever. I mean, so, but whether you think it's significant or not, the fact of the matter is, yes, the property was unoccupied up until March 31st of 2006. Okay, just to reiterate here. So, Mr. Metz claims that the wind was coming from this direction. Okay, I just want to say that. Look at the way it's going across his property. This is the northeastern edge of his property right here. Okay, and he's claiming that the wind was coming like this. Okay, in a south and an east, in the north and an east direction, or from the southwest. So, if that's true, why are the cows going here? The smell would have been better here if it was blowing from the south, if it was blowing in the way that he's suggesting. So it makes no sense that they would have gone here instead of here, because the smell would have been dissipating here quicker than it would have here. So just wanted to point that out. So that's why I have so much trouble with his statement about it being from the southwest. And also the Weather Service says it was blowing in this direction. Okay? Now that makes sense, because it would be blowing in a direction to blow it down and away from this edge of the property. The wind would be coming like this. Right? So this would be the furthest point from the west, and it would be the closest point to the north, which was, if you go the north, it was clear, or clearer, I should say, because if the wind was blowing this way, it was going to be blowing the smell or whatever and everything in a direction like this, so it would dissipate on this edge quicker. So just wanted to point that out. That's why his statement doesn't really make much sense, and it makes more sense that he heard a whoosh or something from over in this direction, maybe about within a mile or 1.5 miles around here. So we're going to come back to this map that just kind of shows how far Avery Salvage is away from Mr. Metz's property. So like I said, like he said, it's 4.5 miles. It's, due south, like so very south. It's hardly worth saying it's southwest, pretty much. But anyway, so that's 4.5 miles. That sound of a whoosh is just not going to travel to him over a 4.5 mile distance. I don't see it. I don't see how that's happening. It makes a lot more sense that the whoosh happened a lot closer to him. And it's not like 3302 Zander is very close to him either. I just think that was the convenient spot. Like I said, because it was an unoccupied property and it gave a certain amount of secrecy. So they were able to, and it may be that the actual killer, who I am not saying it was law enforcement, it maybe could have been, but I'm not saying it was. So the original killer may have brought her there because it was an unoccupied property for that very reason. So that could have started the whole ball in motion here. I don't know. But the fact that Mr. Metz smells it closer to his house leads me to believe that she was burned somewhere else, and that it was moved to that spot that was an unoccupied spot so that it could be set up and have all the things there while, not being conspicuous. And being able to work, under cover of darkness in the middle of pretty much nowhere, and obviously secrecy being the big deal. So that's what makes sense, because that sign in the desk clearly had no marks on it when they first take the picture, and they're clearly showing where they say they found it, and we know, when you look at that first picture, that about an inch of that sign was sticking out, and there was no black felt marks on it. So that is a problem. And like I said, the handwriting doesn't really go along with Stephen Avery's handwriting either. This is where they say it was, right? Well, we can see how much is sticking out there. And that's enough sticking out that we should see some of the black felt. We should see some of the bottoms of the numbers, something, because pretty much all around the edge of that sign is all very close to the edge. The writing is all very close to the edge. So we clearly do not see that there. So that pretty much is going to wrap it up. I basically believe that Mr. Metz has proven that the burning actually happened on the 1st, on November 1st. So I'd like to give a thanks to Carrie Meandle, and, everybody else, that's on social media helping out with this. And if you haven't already, please hit subscribe.